One of the most terrible tragedies of the Great Patriotic War was the siege of Leningrad. In September 1941, German troops, unable to take the city by storm, encircled it. The blockade lasted 872 days and was forever imprinted in the memory of the entire nation. Today, we will examine one of the darkest pages of World War II. We will talk about the siege of Leningrad. On June 22, 1941, Hitler invaded the USSR and, following his favorite strategy of lightning war, blitzkrieg, rushed deep into the country. The goal of Army Group North was the second largest city in the USSR, Leningrad, as St. Petersburg was called in Soviet times. It was a very large and strategically important industrial center, the capture of which would mean the acquisition of hundreds of enterprises, including military ones. The capture of Leningrad could significantly reduce the defense capability of the Red Army and would also allow the Nazis to completely seize the Baltic Sea. The Germans advanced on the city from the south and Finnish troops from the north. Already in June, the construction of a system of defensive structures began along the Luga River. The streets of Leningrad were also being prepared for a heavy fighting. However, it was the Luga line and the desperate resistance of the Red Army and the People's Militia that helped slow down the offensive. The Nazis stood a few kilometers from the city. The Finns surrounded the city from the north. On September 8, 1941, the Wehrmacht captured Schlüsselburg, thereby completely cutting off land routes to Leningrad. The Oranienbaum bridgehead was also taken into a separate encirclement. The blockade began. Millions of people were cut off from the rest of the world, and most of the troops of the Leningrad front were also surrounded. The townspeople faced prolonged bombing and shelling. Many were evacuated, but it was impossible to move all the residents of the million-plus city to a safe place. Buildings and people were deliberately destroyed, and the mass starvation provoked by the Wehrmacht was not only a consequence of the occupiers' actions, but also a goal. In essence, the siege of Leningrad became an act of genocide against the Soviet people, which was recognized quite recently. Hitler wanted to wipe the city off the face of the earth. Leningrad was cut off from the rest of the world, and food supplies were rapidly dwindling. A food crisis began, subsequently leading to mass starvation. Food rationing cards were introduced. Only by having such a card could a citizen buy food, no more than what was allocated to them. But in the most terrible months of the blockade, workers were entitled to 250 grams of bread, other residents to 125 grams. It was hard to even call this food. Bread flour was running out, replaced by cellulose or oil cake. Even such a small piece was valuable in conditions of starvation. In winter, cold was added to the other hardships due to the war. There was almost no electricity or heating in the city. People lived in cold apartments, heating them with whatever they could find. Trams and trolleybuses stopped. People were forced to move on foot along the snow-covered streets. Many fell dead right on the way to work or for water. Deaths from starvation became mass, and corpses lying right on the cold streets became commonplace. In such nightmarish conditions, there were cases of eating pets and even cannibalism. We can judge the difficult life of the besieged by their numerous diaries. The diary of the schoolgirl Tanya Savicheva became one of the symbols of the blockade. On several pages, the dates and times of the deaths of Tanya's relatives are recorded, and the last lines read, "Savichevs died. Everyone died. Only Tanya is left." The road of life helped citizens survive. This was the name given to the only supply route across Lake Ladoga. In winter, necessary products were transported on trucks over the not-so-strong ice. Soldiers and militiamen repeatedly tried to break through the blockade, losing thousands of soldiers each time during several offensive operations. The Red Army managed to capture and hold a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Neva, near Nevskaya Dubrovka, the so-called Nevsky Potocok, which went down in history. Success in breaking the blockade was achieved on January 18, 1943. During Operation Iskra, the Red Army managed to break through the enemy's defenses from two sides and liberate Schlüsselburg. Land communication with Leningrad was restored, By January 27th, significant territories near the city had been liberated, which allowed Marshal Govorov to announce the complete lifting of the blockade. On that day, a festive salute thundered over the city center. The blockade, which had lasted 872 days, ended. Food supplies and production were, and urban transport was restored. The Red Army and the Allies still had more than 2 years of heavy fighting ahead, but for the people of Leningrad, the worst was over. Thus, the invaders, despite constant shelling and a complete blockade, could not destroy Leningrad and its inhabitants. Today, in St. Petersburg, the memory of the courage of the city's defenders and the terrible tragedy brought by the war lives on.